My career ended at Newcastle with a one-off injury to my wrist that went from professional rugby player one day to not the next day. I lost identity, I lost the structure, I lost the framework. It's tough, you ask anybody to stop the career that they're doing now and then work out what they're going to do next. Ain't easy.
What moment did you feel that you had earned the badge of leader?
The second you think that you've nailed it as a leader, you're going backwards. The best leaders I work with, the people who are, you leave a session or you leave a room and you think, wow, those people have a self-awareness. They have an understanding, an ability to see others' perspectives and build that into their own self-awareness. They're giving people the tools to succeed. They make sense of complexity. They make things simple for people to understand. The shared characteristic of all of these people is just their desire to get better. What are you doing to move the dial? What is the action that you're going to change and what impact is that going to have?
What are the core principles that underpin all of that?
Leadership is about decision making and influence. Who are the people that you're influencing around you? How positive is the influence that you're having on them? When it comes to the decision making, what is the framework that you have in place that can increase the likelihood of a positive outcome?
Mr. Lawson, how are we?
Good, thanks Fergus. Great to be here, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. It's number 2 in the studio, and it's great that you have the most Scottish accent that we possibly could have in the house to balance out against me. So I'm going to kick things off with a question that's fresh in my mind because we were speaking whilst I was in New York and I went to an NFL game. So tell me why rugby is superior to the NFL.
Oh wow, you've put me on the spot. The opening gambit, Ferg. I mean, if that's the starting point, where are you going to take me after this? Well, look, I think both have their values. They're different games, aren't they? Yes, there's physicality. The ball's the same shape. People go for speed and skill and power and that physicality, the tackling. I guess they are incredibly different sports because in rugby you couldn't have human beings the size that a lot of these NFL guys are because it's a different challenge on. You're the expert when it comes to physiology and, the physics around it, but trying to move somebody around who is, 400 pounds, whatever it might be, for 60 minutes maybe in a game of rugby and, high intensity for an anaerobic for short periods, that's going to be tricky, right? But I think there's joy in both. What I would say is that a great game in the NFL and a great game in rugby are both mega to watch, and it gives fans something to get engaged with. I would say that what rugby needs to learn from the NFL is turning it into the event, because I'm sure you can give some first-hand experience, but I went to the first ever NFL game at Wembley. Yep. And just the way that the Americans do the event, the showbiz element, the entertainment around it is different. And I want, would rugby be a better game if there were 4 quarters with some entertainment in between that draws more people into it? Possibly. Would it take away from the endurance part of the 80 minutes? Maybe, but could that actually solve some of the challenges around, the injuries that happen, I guess, in both games? But I like tuning into the occasional game of NFL. I obviously love my rugby, but I think rugby needs to continue to look as to how it evolves to grow the game. And, the World Cup's going to be in the US in 8 years' time. Yep. It needs to be a game that isn't alien to the population of 350 million or whatever it is in the US.
Plenty. I think a population of plenty. The reason I ask is because of a lot of the things that you touch upon there, I find myself thinking about when you look at the state of play that rugby's in the UK. And my overwhelming takeaway from watching Jamie play in the NFL at the New York Giants Stadium was, this is a business, not a sport. Whereas in the UK, everything's sport-led, business second. And rugby as a business in the UK is not necessarily on its feet as much as it has been in the past. So given that you're still in the game from a punditry point of view, you obviously have a lot of friends still in the game, you're very much keeping a close eye on it. What do you see the biggest changes being from a fans, business, engagement, relationship, the spectacle and the show business around it from your time playing versus now? Where do you see the crux of the issues being with rugby struggling as it is?
Well, look, you highlight the business element, and it's not a surprise to anybody when you see the Premiership, the impact on the Premiership, and now down to 10 teams. So a couple of teams have gone to the wall because they've been run as sports clubs, not as businesses. And whether that's the salary capping, there's a multitude of different elements. It's sad to see because England has the greatest pool of players anywhere in the world. And for a large number of players, that's their livelihood gone, because there's only so many positions in the game now in England that people can go to. The academy system, people have been chewed up and spat out by that. Now, you saw, I don't know if you would have seen the big game 15 down at Twickenham, Harlequins against Gloucester, DJ beforehand, firing everything up, light show, music, turn it into an event. That's a step forward, but we need that in the Six Nations. We need that in World Cup games. Draw in this audience, make it that event. Now the changes from I stopped playing 10 years ago. It was August last year that I was told I was done, and 10 years has gone by. A lot's changed. The game's changed slightly. The laws have changed a bit. Nuance changes to the laws. Social media is a big thing, and for me, I think like rugby's greatest asset is the fact that it's the ultimate team sport. Yes, don't get me wrong. There's the shapes and sizes are a little bit more standard now, rather than it being a game for all shapes and sizes.
The sad reality being that 12s look like 6s.
Well, exactly, right?
You've got wingers running out that could play in the front row.
Yeah, exactly. But there's still a place for Darcy Graham. There's still a place for Weenie Antonio at 145 kilos. Darcy at 80 kilos soaking wet probably. So I think for me, so the ultimate team game, but a game whereby individuals aren't given the opportunity to showcase themselves, because I've done a load of interviews with a number of Kiwis, and they're typically really not great at talking about themselves because it's all about the team first. They're no dickheads culture, and I think that's one of the areas whereby we need personalities to be able to step forward. You need Ellis Genge to be allowed to unleash himself. We've seen it a little bit with Joe Marler. Imagine, Big Jim, who we both know, like great pal of mine, former teammate. Big Jim wasn't allowed to be Big Jim when he was playing rugby, because if he was Big Jim and, albeit social media was on an upward curve, not where it is now when he was still playing, but if he was that way and then he had a bad game on a Saturday, someone would tell him that it's because he was, being Big Jim.
Yeah.
That's the way he was behind the scenes, but if he was stuck in front of the media, he would have to toe the party line. And, I remember going into media interviews with a sheet of paper telling me what the key messaging was, right? And so therefore, I think this balance of understanding that unions, clubs need to protect themselves from being exposed by, unleashing a rogue who says something a little bit, against the norm that gets picked up and turned into a headline, but also giving people the platform to be themselves. I think that's where social media, the people who are good at it, are starting to really work that out.
I think so. I think, again, going back to the NFL comparison, because that was my overarching takeaway, was this is just a different league in terms of that exact point. They had highlights of what specific players were wearing as they were coming in off the bus, what cars they were driving in, all this it's almost a bit tabloidy.
Yeah.
But Jim can talk on any subject matter, the way he discusses things on the podcast, and he's creative director for World Rugby now, which is obviously a great position to be in on this topic. But there's so many personalities in rugby. My playing time was cut short because of too many concussions, and I was never going in a particular direction beyond recreational level. But I love the game. I think character building wise, the range of athletic ability that I have has come from rugby. And it's something I definitely want my kids that do not yet exist to play in the future. But I often find myself thinking, does the game have the legs for that to actually be as accessible a reality as it was for me growing up? And I'm not sure.
Yeah, look, I think it's not comparing apples with apples, NFL to rugby, right? You've got, but in order to grow the game, you've got to grow the commercial value of the game. You've got to be able to grow the value of your assets, which are your players, and you've got to then be able to commercialize that. And I think until you get exposure, the NFL do it so well when you're getting some, the in-game insights from some of the people playing. But also, for big sponsors, they want to know that they're going to get access to, and it's going to be covered in the media. They're going to actually get value for what they're doing. But you only create that value by giving the access to the players behind the scenes. We'll see in a couple of weeks' time what happens with the Six Nations Netflix, right? Well, that'll be a behind the scenes. As I understand it, there was some behavioural shifts in some of the players when a camera's in front of them, right? And maybe trying to, put themselves across as being slightly different, even to the person who their teammates know, right? Because there's a platform. So even that should hopefully be a shift forward and give people insights into what it is. But still, that's only scratching the surface around. I've got the old Gloucester boys WhatsApp group, and honestly, it has me in tears of laughter the majority of the time when you've got guys like Big Jim, Andy Hazel talking, and Luke Narroway talking absolute nonsense, torching the same boys that were playing alongside them 10 years ago. Those are the things that light me up. But if even if you got 50% of that to the fan base, to the commercial partners, to the broadcasters, and you can see them trying to move things forward, then it would change the game.
Yeah, the reason I brought up the comparison is just because it's fresh in my mind, and it's great to get insights from somebody that still has been in and is now still in, but in a different capacity of the game. Because it makes me it's that the future of the game I'm concerned for. It doesn't keep me up at night, but I know how much value I've got from it personally. So I very much hope for the longevity of the game we find solutions to these problems. And I was truly blown away with the lens of, wow, this is a business, not a sport, that I experienced just recently when we were last chatting. But we'll move on, because your career wasn't in very, very long commercial breaks between downs. It was in a much faster paced game. And again, going back to the character building of rugby, I want to ask how much of an influence you think your family's background had on your sporting upbringing, because obviously Bill, Alan, huge influences on the direction you went in, but you've built a career, you've built a life, you've built a family around rugby, and it's the nature-nurture debate, isn't it? Do you think you would have pulled on the thread of rugby, professional sport, and the career that you've gone down were it not for that exposure at a young age?
Look, I think it's something I think about all the time now with two young boys, right? It's I grew up being surrounded by sport, and this came from Papa's the voice of rugby, and going down to Hoyk and seeing him in his office and the videotapes everywhere, putting on his digging the VHS out and firing in his machine and watching the Bill's best bits on his TV, and then going down to the Wilton Park in Hoyk, and Papa was a PE teacher in his background, and he still had the key to the padlock that had the big green shed at the back of Hoyk Wilton Park, and you'd go and he'd unlock the padlock, open the door, and all of this sports kit would just fall out. It'd be javelins and discus, a health and safety advisor's nightmare, tackle shields, rugby balls, footballs, everything, and that would just be summer days, go down there in the summer holidays, charge about, but everything was about sport and the platform that gave you to life in general. So it wasn't, whilst Papa was, the voice of rugby, while my dad had played, for Scotland at rugby and had a esteemed amateur career alongside professionalism, given that professional rugby didn't exist. It was about sport. So Mum and Dad through school, I did cricket, athletics, tennis in the summer. I did rugby, cross country, squash in the winter. It was all golf all year round. It was all about the platform that sport gave you for life. And then obviously as I got older, I guess I was identified as being relatively talented in rugby. I had the background in rugby. I guess I had the expertise of, Mum's as knowledgeable as anybody in the bloody game of rugby, with being brought up around Papa, and loves the sport. And I think having an older brother who was also, he's a really good athlete. He was a good rugby player, and had the opportunity to go professional, but actually chose that it wasn't necessary for him. He played Scotland Sevens. He was given the opportunity with Edinburgh professionally, but for him, rugby was a lifestyle that fed his life, and he loved the social element of it. He loved the training element. He loved the competition, but didn't love the thought of being told to go in a squat rack and squat 2.5 times his body weight. Right? It was one of those things for him. But I think for me, sport was always a big part of my upbringing. It turns out that I was quite good at rugby, and there was able to focus on it. I loved it. What it gave me with regards to my mates now from the rugby team that I played in at school are still my best mates. It became a profession. It became, a passion that was a hobby that became a job. And, if I had my time again, I'd do things slightly differently, probably, because you get immersed in it to a level that you kind of lose perspective at times of the life that surrounds it, right? Because it's the only thing that's important to you. But I think it offered me so much. The family loved it. Probably struggled as mum and dad probably struggled as much with me stopping playing rugby as I did, because they'd been on every touchline since I was playing under 8s rugby at Stirling County, through school days, through club days at Heriots, and then into professional rugby. So yeah, it was a good old journey.
It was. We'll deep dive on that a little bit, because I think especially the concept of leadership, which is obviously now how you spend your day to day, is something that's been developed throughout that career. But if we start right at the end, which is the here and now, against the background of the family sort of thing, how has the lens you've just described, that experience growing up, and the experience you have as a leader, moulded how you like to act as a father?
Oh, that's a big question. Human beings, as individuals, we have a truly unique lens on how we see the world, right? And it's, and so much of it is hardwired back to our experiences. If you listen to Simon Sinek, he'll say, the vast majority of the human being that you are is the experiences that you had up to the age of 16. With the work that I do now, a big part of what we do is being able to drill into the individual and their experiences between 0 and 22. Those really informed years, earliest memories, upbringings, the environment that you were, the failures, the wins, the challenges, the hardship, whatever it may be. And I've reflected a lot on my own, and I was brought up around great people, and I was given an incredibly fortunate upbringing to, do the stuff that I wanted with the people who I wanted to do it with. And I was given essentially a platform to succeed, and I guess the tools to kind of do it in many ways. So but then equally it had to come from that inner drive, which I saw from the work ethic and investment that came of time to understand what's important to you from parents, right? Dad, when I talk about, Dad, what were your memories of Gregor and I and Lindsay growing up as kids? He was like, well, your mum dealt with the most of it, right? And he worked incredibly hard to provide the platform for us to succeed and do the things that he wanted us to be able to do. I think parenting has changed now, and there is a shift culturally, I think, in the involvement of both parents, where both parents are together in the parenting of the kids. But, with the fundamentals of it, you learn on the job, but when it comes to role modeling, and being able to think back to my experiences as a kid, trying to create the same for Freddie and Louis now with India, as us as parents is massive. And I've made a heap of mistakes. I've behaved against the value set that I set for myself. That's created challenges, but at the core, I'm doing my best and trying to continue to grow and give the boys now what the platform that Gregor, Lindsay, and I had to succeed that Mum and Dad gave us.
So 31 caps for Scotland, with a illustrious career along the way, various clubs, Gloucester, Newcastle, and obviously international stuff as well. What moment did you feel that you had earned the badge of leader intrinsically? Did it ever come? Does it exist now? Is there still some imposter syndrome whenever you're presenting the discussion? Or was there a moment where you felt that was a series of decisions that means I have earned that right?
Look, I think one of the reasons that I'm as passionate about what I do now as I am is that I captained Scotland without 1 minute's worth of leadership development. Whether from... You'd learn from coaches, you'd have conversations with coaches, but with regards to a designed leadership development program that would develop self-awareness, others' perspectives, that would then inform decision-making, there was nothing. And there still is limited stuff that goes on. There's sports psychology stuff, which is tremendous. In-game, thinking clearly, redhead, bluehead, whatever it might be. The Kiwis have been big on that. But with regards to developing the human being that can then improve and enhance what they do as leaders, as a sports person, I think there's still a massive gap in that market. Now, I vividly remember being asked to captain Scotland for the first time, and on the Friday night before we played South Africa, standing in front of the rest of my teammates for the next day and having to, plant the seed and say a few words. And I had guys, Chris Patterson, Nathan Hines, Ross Ford, Sean Lamont, guys who are infinitely more experienced than I was. If I align it to what, if you talk about overarching fundamentals of leadership, and what if you had to really strip it down to a couple of things, for me, leadership, and the work that I do with Kianis now, leadership is about decision making and influence, right? And in rugby, whether you can talk about being a natural leader as a scrum half, a position whereby you had to make multiple decisions, you were close to the action, you drove the strategy and game plan, and were right at the center of the calls, and so on and so forth. So the decision making was in there, and then for me it was about how do you influence and enhance the other teammates around you. So now the work that I do in creating frameworks for success in that would say I had a lot of the tools there, but my self-awareness I was relying on innate self-awareness, never being asked to hold the mirror up to myself and qualify what it is that I'm doing and how I can enhance it and so on. You'd set goals, you'd set KPIs and all that kind of stuff. You'd get all the data in the world after a game to review yourself. You'd do all the analysis. But actually from a true leadership perspective, I think my experiences from sport, in a different world, my experiences from launching and growing a business, and then now they feed into leadership. So I can sit opposite someone and say, captain my country in a high-performing elite sport, and being able to, I've walked that path. I've done similar in business, successes, failures. So I can sit opposite people with credibility. But the second you think that you've nailed it as a leader, you're going backwards, because if you're not growing and improving all the time, then somebody else is going to go by you, and even you're not even being the best person that you can be potential wise.
How did you deal with the transition out of rugby? Because it's as you said, it is a lifestyle sport. It's a huge component of your day to day. There's a lot around the sport that you can do around the fringes, which means that whilst obviously training time is limited because you're getting bashed about the whole time, the skill work in the scrum half position you can do. There's time you can spend on X, Y, Z. You can always be doing something. You can always be having a couple of pints here or there at the club level. Obviously less so when you're at captaining international level. But the transition, it was a wrist injury, wasn't it? It was recurring wrist injury, and I can imagine the iterations of trying to make it work, trying to see a way out to get back onto the pitch, the frustration that must have come when you were told you didn't decide, you were told that's it, isn't it? Yeah. What was the initial spike in emotion that came with that, and then how did you reframe it into ultimately launching the first business?
How long have you got? Fergus, I've got, having listened to a lot of your stuff, a lot of your background, your hinterland, like there are some real crossovers, primarily focused around Newcastle, right? My career ended at Newcastle with a one-off injury to my wrist that went from professional rugby player one day to not the next day. And, to give the context, professional rugby, structure, right? And I'm sure now it's an email PDF, but in those days it was probably an email PDF, but an A4 piece of paper handed out on the day after a game to say this is the structure for the following week, where to be, what time, what you're doing, what you're wearing, how long it's going to last. Meal times would be allocated in there. You'd know who you were going to be surrounded with, whether it's backs, forwards, units, weight sessions, speed sessions, rugby sessions, defence, attack, kicking, skills, whatever it would be, right? Meal times built in there, analysis, etc. Everything structured, colour-coded, and you are there. If you're not early, you're late. There will be punishments, and it's just all built around discipline that the framework gave you, right? So you go from that to, I'll never forget it, Monday morning, drove from Newcastle to Leeds to the hospital down there to see the lead hand and wrist specialist in Europe, Doug Campbell. Wonderful Scottish man. He's the kind of lead guy for the European Tour golf and so on. Like, brilliant bloke, incredibly good at his job. And I went down there and I sat down with him, and we did a bit of a scan, and then he did an assessment, then a scan, and then looked at the results, and he was like, "Rory, I'm sorry to say you're done." I was like, "Okay, when?" Like, I've got presumably I played at the weekend. I've trained with the boys all through this pre-season, where like it doesn't feel that bad. And then he just said, "Look, you're one bad knock away from a wrist replacement," which at that stage there had been 300 done in the general public in Europe.
Right. Okay.
So, you're not talking elite sport, you're not talking rugby, you're not talking someone who needed to chuck, 80, 90, 15 to 20 meter passes per game with a snap of a wrist, right? Yeah. It's so it was immediately like, fuck, this is serious. So that was it. And then got back in the car with head physio, drove back up to Newcastle, and I walked into Kingston Park, into Dean Richards' office, director of rugby, and by then I think the physio had spoken to him. So he said walked in, and Dean kind of mumbled, "Oh, so I gather you're done." And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely devastated, incredibly sad, tough to take, blah blah blah." And he said, "Okay, well, look, we'll sort of a settlement, a financial settlement or whatever it is. Grab your stuff. You don't need to bother coming in anymore." I was like, "Right, okay. I'd really like to come in and say, let the boys know, because as far as they're concerned, I played the game on the weekend, didn't go off. They're none the wiser. And for my own peace of mind, I'd like to be able to, talk to my teammates." And then the Tuesday morning, I woke up and I'd planned to go in, and I saw my A4 piece of paper with a schedule on the bedside table, and I went to reach for it, and I was like, fuck, I don't need that anymore. Like, that has no relevance to my life anymore. And I was almost had this drone view of myself being kind of weighed down in the bed as this 5-ton weight, and I was like, I can't move, I don't know where I need to go, I don't know what I need to be doing, but I'm going to have to work it out for myself. And I went into training and told the boys, and I was pretty emotional about it. And then I'd only been at Newcastle 15 months maybe by then. So I had to work out what the hell I was going to do. And, I had a little bit of time, a few months with the settlement that Newcastle paid to be able to work it out for myself. But it was dark. Like, I lost identity. I lost the structure. I lost the framework. I probably, or almost certainly, didn't go to the right people to help. I didn't reach out. I had to start again, but I didn't know where to start again. And being honest, I probably took 6 months to work out what it was going to do. I probably met 150 people for coffee. What do you do? What does that mean? What does the job entail? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And then along the way, I had a great chat with, a great mate who we ended up deciding to launch a business ourselves. And I launched and ran that for 6 years. But honestly, I was probably struggling for identity until I got into doing what I do now. And that's, a lot of that's on me understanding the right questions that I would have asked or I should have asked, or the people that I should have gone to. But it's tough. You ask anybody to stop the career that they're doing now and then work out what they're going to do next. It's got to create something that is going to give you the earnings that you're looking for, the lifestyle that you're looking to give, a sense of identity and fulfillment and purpose. Ain't easy. And it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I'd like to be able to help anybody coming out of the game now. But there's still a lot to do. People are trying really hard, but the people in the sport, I had an MA in business. I have an MA in business studies before I went into professional rugby. Worked with a number of businesses, oil and gas, my brother's business. Did some other bits in there, but until it's your thing, it's so hard to do. But equally, so blessed to have been able to do rugby for over a decade and be paid to do it.
100%. I can imagine it was a complete journey along the way, but what do you think, what itch wasn't being scratched in the 6 years that you owned and ran the business that you then managed to replace when it came to doing what you do now? Was it as simple as passion, or was it you weren't equipped with the toolbox to manage your own mental well-being that came from just doing the time and doing the reps of having the conversations and asking the right questions about yourself?
Yeah, well, I think it's something now that when any advice, the advice that I'd give to somebody now, and I guess that's probably the best way to frame it, is if I could go back 10 years now to being, rugby finishes, what's next? It's to be able to say, rugby, the experiences, the life that rugby provides as a platform is something that I would never change. It was like the experiences of, touring, of teammates, the brotherhood, whatever you want to call it, the culture of high performance, the learnings, the exposure to media and public that lots of people think they want, but you're being measured on decisions in game that can dictate someone's happiness on a Saturday night, when they go home, whether that's for club or country. But for me, it would be taking time. Something that I think lots of people are really poor at is, post rugby, I was so desperate to find that something that was going to give me that fulfillment, that purpose, that passion, that drive, that, I took time to meet people and find out what it might be. But actually, I probably didn't pause enough. It was just like, right, what's next? Where do I go? What's it going to be that I do? What's that going to look like? What might it pay me to feed the life that I want to create, and so on. But knowing that there's always going to be so much disparity between the career that I just had and the next bit. So understanding that, use that as a fuel for and a skill set learned that could be applied to something else, not as an identity that you kind of need to come to peace with no longer having. It's like former rugby player, you do a bit of media stuff. Like, people still think that the media stuff that I've done for the past 10 years is my main thing, right? And that's, that's something that's I've probably held on to because it's given me that continued connection to the game. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's, rugby, I think I struggled to find something that I could apply the skill set and experience and drive to. And it's something that we spoke about, before coming on the pod. You're 10, 15 years behind your peers in business, in industry, whatever it is, even though you've got all that lived experience and some experiences that are way beyond what lots of people could dream of. You've got the imposter of, Christ, the majority of my mates have got 15 years here of business experience. They're talking a different language here. So how do I accelerate there? You're always in a rush. Whereas actually, and a lot of people now in business, you realize lots of people are comfortable. What sport gave you was this environment whereby you're looking around. If you're not getting better every single day, then you might not have a contract, you might not have a job, and you're going to be looked upon by your peers as not fulfilling what's expected of you. And then you go into a different environment. Like, that's what I love now, is trying to drive excellence and high performance in individuals, in teams, and in cultures in business. I think sport can learn a lot from business. I think business can learn a lot from sport. And now I've found the passion that is about leadership, about helping people fulfill potential in not only themselves, but allow them to elevate and influence, those around them who they lead.
What are the core principles that underpin all of that then? Because you work with a variety of organisations in a variety of capacities, and I can imagine, especially post period of our lives from 2020 to 2022 and a bit, not going to say the word so this doesn't get flagged on Spotify, thank you very much. Cultures, work ethics, hierarchies, all of the things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis now, what are the core principles that you think are what's lacking for people to achieve the excellence that you try and instill in them from a sporting experience point of view?
Like, it's a difficult question, because what I've learned, working with leaders, is that leadership is about the individual, and then you compound that in multiple individuals who make up a leadership team, who then look to influence and drive a culture. Okay, so the starting point has to be on an individual level, whereby you build out, the best leaders I work with, the people who are, you leave a session or you leave a room and you think, wow, those people have a self-awareness. They have an understanding, an ability to see others' perspectives and build that into their own self-awareness. They're giving people the tools to succeed. They make sense of complexity rather than trying to show their expertise by talking in a language that is complex. They make things simple for people to understand that enables others to deliver on that. You're talking about the greater good. You're talking about sustainable futures, and you're talking about making courageous and ethical decisions. Now, those are the 7 components that actually feed what we would call the wheel of wise leadership, right? But the starting point is self-awareness. So most people,
and I assume all 6 are irrelevant in your mind without that first point.
Absolutely, because if you don't know yourself, and if you're not holding the mirror up to yourself to understand how you can improve and enhance what it is that you're doing, then the rest of the stuff, it's a starting point, it's a key component, and it's a fundamental. Self-awareness, and it's where the analytics that we use do hold the mirror up, but we're not giving someone a report and saying, Fergus, this is who you are, this is how you lead, these are the areas you need to improve. We're holding the mirror up, asking questions, say, why might that be the case? We'll dig into the hinterland, right? Let's find out about you as a human being, the experiences that inform the way that you now lead, and take ownership of that, as to where you see that the small number of high impact shifts that could enhance what it is that you're doing. And then you're starting to think, right, who are the others around me who I can influence? Or, for example, if I'm working alongside you and I know your hinterland story, the influence that could have on me, knowing you as a human being, your lived experience, the way you see the world, and the ability to understand your perspective on something. Like, you imagine that, you compound that across 10 leaders, 20 leaders, 50 leaders, or 3 leaders in a small leadership team. That's mega. That the potential to enhance things in that space is big. And then you get into culture. So, but for me,
but culture follows leadership, doesn't it? Essentially, yeah. It's the downstream. It's the downstream outcome of effective leadership. In the same way that, if we're looking at a hierarchical, typical corporate structure, you've got C-suite, and then you've got middle management, and you've got, obviously there'll be more tiers to that, but culture from the bottom upwards is created by the top down, and leadership from the top down can only create the culture at the bottom by filtering the whole way through, whereby if the C-suite are all incredibly vulnerable, holding the mirror up to themselves and looking at things through the right lens, but that doesn't then filter down to the same behaviours in the middle management, then the sort of jumping between tiers in terms of perception and worldview will fall flat on its face, won't it? So if an individual listening was to hold a mirror up to themselves, what are the questions that you would encourage them to ask to start to pull the thread and think a little bit more on themselves on an individual basis as to how they could start to become a better leader in their own lives?
Well, look, if you strip it back to two bits, the decision making and influence. Okay, you talk about culture. There will be people who have a huge influence on the culture of an organization who do not have a leadership tag. Okay, they're not part of the C-suite. They're not even part of middle management, but they can influence positively and negatively the culture of a place. Right. So, at whatever level, influence is a big factor. We all have decisions to make on a daily basis in personal life and in business life as to how you go about doing things. So again, on that level, how much thought do you put into decision making? Is there a framework that you follow when it comes to really important decisions? Don't get me wrong. We can all make snap decisions based on lived experience, things that don't really matter that much, that have limited impact as to what outcome a decision might have. But do people have a framework that they can follow that is going to elevate the chance of that decision that they make leading to a positive outcome? And I would say that influence and decision making, lots of people don't challenge their decision making process and therefore it's leave it a little bit to chance in what the outcome might be. I think if let's talk about New Year's resolutions, right? Decision making. What are the New Year's resolutions that I'm going to commit to? People commit to them. Most of them are early January now. Most people will have given up on their New Year's resolutions already, or maybe they'll last January. But actually, how do they hold themselves to account? Lots of people talk about accountability. Oh, I want accountability. Then actually, when they get it, they run away from it. They don't want the accountability. But I think two simple things. Who are the people that you're influencing around you, and how positive is the influence that you're having on them? And when it comes to the decision making, what is the framework that you have in place that can increase the likelihood of a positive outcome more often? Because if you've got both those things right, then you are enhancing your decision making and the people around you.
And once that foundation is built, every decision you make, every action you take, everything you do within that circle, as it were, will develop you as a leader, with a few deviations along the way where you need to reassess and recalibrate on those sort of two key points: who you're influencing, how you're making decisions. And I think, it's a good way of looking at things because it makes it one of the key points.
Yeah.
How do you make complexity simple?
Yeah.
It does make it very simple, but that almost makes it inherently harder because it's just being honest with yourself and then taking the action, doing the work. And people want it to be more complex because that makes it harder, which makes it more unattainable, which means that there's a good excuse as to why you haven't done the work to get there.
And it's, people want quick fixes, right? Whether it's losing a bit of Christmas weight, in the space of 7 days, or whether it's going from one position in a business to another. They want things straight away, right? We're all lots of people now. The way of the world is that people want quick fixes, and I think a lot of the time these things do take time. Behavioral shift is really tough, but that's everything that we focus on is behavioral shift, because I've been to, you could go on a TED talk that would change the way that you think, that would change the dynamic. I do keynote speeches whereby I could go in and I could do a keynote speech that would have people smashing the walls down to leave there, but then the next morning they'll probably just jump back on the hamster wheel and run at the same pace that they've been running at. Behavioral shifts are hard, but my God, when you get them going and when you create different outcomes, and when you compound that over time and compound that over people and cultures, there's nothing better. And people, I think this is the big challenge, is that what are you doing to move the dial? What is the action that you're going to change, and what impact is that going to have? Because I think it's all too often, I'm just using a terrible option around New Year's resolutions, but people write down New Year's resolutions and they don't actually talk about why they want to do it. They're not, what is the impact, but also what is the action that I continually need to take to be able to create the outcomes that I want to create?
Makes perfect sense. And again, it's alarmingly simple at its core. But final question, because I know you've got a call very soon. Am I right, Jamie? 10 minutes?
Oh,
oh okay. Well, you can really pull it out on this one then. Which leader, in your experience today, has inspired you most, and why?
That's it's a really tough
without
one,
upsetting anyone, obviously.
Well, no, I think it's a combination. It's a combination of a number, and it might sound like a bit of a cop out, but I have been around. When you talk about role modeling, growing up, being around, I had a couple of coaches at school who I remembered way more than I did my teachers at school. But John Foster and Colin Mackay were my PE teachers and rugby teachers at school. And aside from the rugby coaching, they taught me about turning up with the right attitude, with the right appearance and the approach that is going to lead to the greatest success. A lot of it is sports coaches. I've learned so much from Papa with regards to preparation. He would prepare for a commentary to the nth degree at a time before Wikipedia or player profiles. He'd get the annual at the start of a year, but he would be down on touchlines looking at body language, having conversations with people. So that curiosity that's carried through, but also the understanding that he carried. He was BBC for over 50 years, and he understood that he needed to entertain, he needed to educate, and he needed to inspire people who were watching the game. So I think that was but he was always about entertainment, right? And I think if you can't have fun in what you're doing, then you've got to question yourself as well, right? So teachers, Papa, Mum and Dad, my brother, loads of learnings. I did a day a week at Care and Energy in Edinburgh when I signed my first contract, looking to put some of my MA in business studies to work. Sir Bill Gamble was there at the time. I learned a boatload from him. Just going into his office, asking questions, him asking questions about sport, understanding those kind of things. Bob Eason from the Scottish Institute of Sport, brilliant. Just his compassion. Rob Moffat from the Sevens, compassion.
Yeah. I know Rob. Yeah, phenomenal guy.
Incredible guy. But it's really interesting. Moff now, Don Leddingham, who is founder CEO of Kianis, from the Borders, knows Rob well. We talk about warmth and edge in leadership, and warmth being that positivity, that support, that nurturing, that forgiveness. Edge being delivery, high performance, outcomes, results. And, Rob was my sevens coach with Scotland, filled with warmth, unbelievable. And alongside Bob Eason, two incredibly warm guys. Now, introducing Rob to this warmth and edge and the analytics side of things, he would actually say, you know what, I wish I had more edge in the delivery of my messaging. And I wish Moff had more edge as well, because I would have probably been better at what I did if he was demanding outcomes, demanding high performance, driving success. So, those guys within it. And then, in the world of business, my old business partner, Damien Kennedy, learned so much from him. Working class lad from the west of Ireland in Cork, his get up and go, his drive, his desire, his resilience to stick with it, perseverance. So much that, I resonated with me, but also, we talk about standing next to like-minded people, right? And Damo's from a different background, had a different hinterland story, but you knew when he was sat on the other side of the desk that you were both laser focused on the same outcomes. And, in the leadership stuff that I do now, there's been a lot of stuff that I've learned from Don. I've learned a lot from leaders, whether it's people at, some of the client base around Google or Allianz or, the renewable sectors, learning from people all the time through their lived experience. But the big thing is that the shared, I suppose, characteristic of all of these people is just their desire to get better. And I think that's something that, I carry forwards, is that, if I'm asking other people to get better as leaders, or, and those who they lead and their organizations that they lead, then I've got to be asking the question of myself. And I think it's something that when I first came into the space, it's like, I've got to know all about the analytics and my background and how I feed that in and so on and so forth. But actually now it's about, I've got to be able to do myself what I'm asking others to do within their roles. And I listened, and you'll listen to, Chris Williamson and his podcast. One of my really interesting takeaways from that was actually Jimmy Carr, right? I didn't think I'd learn an awful lot from Jimmy Carr, other than, I remember he was at Edinburgh Festival, and I remember Best of the Fest. I think it's 11:59 p.m. it starts, and you never know what you're going to get. And I went there with a bunch of my brother's mates and a few pals, and we stood and watched Jimmy Carr essentially practice his material for obviously future sessions. And one of my brother's pals heckled him from the balcony because he was basically just reading out stuff on his bit, just to gauge the reaction. He got heckled and came back with a terrible response. And Jimmy Carr, I really like his comedy, but it opened my eyes to the process that the comedians go through to test content. And listen to Chris Williams' podcast, and Jimmy Carr spoke about trajectory and position, and how you'd much rather be on the right trajectory than have the top position. So you'd much rather be, and let's use the darts, right? So Luke Littler, right, and Luke Humphreys, both of them are on this upward trajectory. Luke Humphreys hadn't won a major event before October. Now he's won 4 major events. He's won the world title. He's number 1 in the world, right? Luke Littler, 16-year-old, nobody had ever heard of him, and he's now just reached the PDC World Championship final, lost in the final, but he is on this upward trajectory that is unbelievable. There would be number 3 in the world, who I'm not even sure who it is, or number 2 in the world, who's just been knocked off by Luke Humphreys, is on a downward trajectory because he was number 1 before this competition, right? Now, he is probably viewing himself in a lesser position than the person who is Luke Littler. I don't know if he'll be top 32 in the world now, but he was 200th, let's say, in the world. So he's on this rapid growth. For all of us, like, what trajectory are you on? What are you doing to make sure that you're on the upward trajectory, and that you're not just relying on position or status or profile or whatever it is within your job, within society, within the business, whatever it might be, because those are the people who you see treading water or ultimately going backwards because the other people are going to go by them.
Complacency and comfort are the two sort of risks there, aren't they?
Comfort's dangerous.
It is. We should aspire for comfort in life, obviously, not to sound incredibly insensitive in some ways, the ways it could be phrased. But yeah, getting too comfortable in one position or getting complacent with the position that you're in is dangerous. And it's something that is something I hold myself fiercely accountable day to day. Where as soon as I start to feel like, if I ever catch myself thinking, you've achieved, obviously enjoy and embrace the fact that we've had a good month, we've done this, we've done that, I've covered X distance, I'm proud of one thing. But if you ever feel like you've done it or that's it or job done, I'm like, no, wrong. Reframe it as, right, how does this contribute to the direction we're going in the bigger picture? And then immediately recalibrate on that. Otherwise it's easy to think, and then before you know it, I let slip all the things that I know make me that little bit better every day and make me ultimately the happy, healthy version of myself that I am day to day. It's why Christmas period, I've probably come out the back of it a little bit hazy, because a lot of the habits that I hold myself accountable to day have been bent a little bit in. But you need that. You do.
You need that. And I think it's
what you do next that matters.
Yeah, look, it's I guess one of the big things for me is now like curiosity in people, and like, talk about leading, learning, whatever it is, right? The Freddie and Louie is 4 and 2 years old. The amount that I learn from them, like, is just, it's like, they are hilarious, but they're teaching me stuff all the time because my curiosity now, essentially, it's like, it's this painting that continues to build in a human form, right? And that you're influeing, that you're having to make decisions for them in many ways. India, my wife, the amount that I learned from her, given her hinterland, the way that she approaches like continual improvement. I made some shifts this year with regards to reaching out to people that can make me better as a person, and that's learned from her. The experiences, the curiosity around what makes others tick that might work for me as well. Not everything works, but at the same time, I think it's curiosity about what is possible without needing the proof of it being possible.
Agreed. Curiosity is my guiding principle, and I think it's a good one to lead by. I don't often prescribe or think that anything is an individual, but I think curiosity is a fantastic trait / value to try and uphold. Well, Rory, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. If there is somewhere for people to reach out to you or explore corporate leadership options, what is the best way to get in touch?
Well, look, I think I'm on the socials as Rory Lawson 9 on Twitter and Instagram. Come through your pod, and rather than chucking my email out, which I'm sure I wouldn't be bombarded with loads of business. But you know what? Reach out on the socials, and I would love to pick up. There's no such thing as a conversation that doesn't have value in it.
Agreed. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Much
Thanks
appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Speak soon.
Good man. Cheers.